Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here tonight. I'm Pete Eberle with the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. For those who are not familiar with CRES, CRES and our local chapters provide education, policy advocacy, and community engagement that accelerate Colorado towards a carbon neutral future powered by 100% renewable energy. Founded in 1996, CRES is a statewide 501c3 nonprofit that is supported by our sustaining individual members, our business sponsors, as well as donations. You can sign up for our newsletter, event announcements, social media links, and become a member or donor at www.cres-energy.org, cres-energy.org. Also, make sure to visit our YouTube channel, where this video and over 260 previously recorded presentations are housed and have been viewed over 1.4 million times. So before we get started, I have a couple of upcoming event announcements. On Thursday, July 17th, 6:30 p.m. at the Odell Brewery in Five Points, Denver, we will have How Solar Infrastructure Supports Agriculture in a Hotter, Drier Climate. That'll feature Byron Komenick, founder of Jack's Solar Garden, who will describe his family's evolution from a hay farm to a solar farm while sharing lessons learned about how microclimates of solar panels can improve conditions for vegetation, livestock, and agricultural labor if built right. Then on Thursday, July 24th at 12 p.m., these are all Mountain Time as well, we will have a webinar featuring, entitled Tapping the Thermal Energy Opportunity with Geothermal Networks. We'll be joined by Zainab Megavi of HEAT, a nonprofit that is helping utilities transition from gas to low carbon thermal energy providers utilizing ground source heat pump technology to heat and cool buildings. When deployed via community scale geothermal energy network, it provides a safe, efficient, affordable, renewable, local, and always available source of thermal energy. And then on Thursday, August 28th, 7 p.m. at the Jefferson Unitarian Church in Golden, our Jefferson County chapter will be hosting How to Solve Colorado's Outage Problem. If you've read recently, there's been some reports on some reliability issues, primarily in the investor-owned utilities. And we will have Jim Gilbert, who serves on CRES's policy committee. He'll take a look at what truly lies at the root of this problem in Colorado and ways we can solve it together through a bottom-up meets top-down approach by empowering communities and encouraging distributed energy prosumerism. So that'll be on Thursday, August 28th at 7 p.m. You can, if you're not on our meetup or our events announcements, you can go to cres-energy.org to register. So without further ado, Bill, I will hand it off to you and let you get after it.
All right, thanks, Pete. Thank you, everyone, for spending Tuesday afternoon with us. And I really do want to focus this on answering questions. You're here for a reason. You came to learn about something about heat pumps, and hopefully I can help answer that. I live in Golden, Colorado. I've been here my whole life. I went to CU as well. I majored in environmental biology and Japanese, of all things. And I started building homes probably 35 years ago. I know I don't look that old, but I started building straw bale homes down in the San Luis Valley, just very much trying to build locally with local materials and whatnot. And then I started GB3 Energy in 2007. We started as a home performance company where we would retrofit existing homes. And that has gone through various different stages. I've done a couple different startups. They've failed, but GB3 is still here, and we're really focusing on electrification of existing homes right now. So we install heat pump water heaters, and then mostly on the mechanical side. I have my master's license, a master mechanical or an HVAC license A with the city of Denver, and then that reciprocates throughout Boulder, Jefferson County, etc. And we work mostly in the metro area, in the close foothills, and then a little bit in Steamboat as well. So I think we'll just go on from there. So I'm gonna see if I can do this properly. So again, what do you all want to know? And I'm going to have Pete help me with the answering any questions, but these are just some questions that I thought of. But you're here for a reason as well. And there's maybe something in particular that you want to know. Maybe it's cost, maybe it's the rebates, maybe it's how do these work, how do we size them, etc. And we've installed hundreds and hundreds of heat pumps. I've been installing for we're an Excel energy contractor. We do a lot of work in Boulder. I do a lot of work with Energy Outreach Colorado, which is a low income provider. My company electrified the first Denver Housing Authority unit last year. It was just 17 units, but full electrification with solar, upgraded panels, heat pump water heaters, getting rid of the gas furnace, getting rid of the gas water heater. In fact, I was out there today fixing a heat pump water heater, and then electric stoves as well. So no more gas at all there. But here's some questions. So I'm going to take 5, and I want you guys to identify the real question why you're here. Like, what do you want to learn? And then we'll revisit this at the end and make sure that I have answered the questions. Or if not, we'll go through that. And I think the presentation should take like 30 to 40 minutes. So just identify what it is that you want to learn from this, and hopefully I'll get to it. Okay. So I'm just going to start with basics, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. I know you mostly have heard about this technology, you know what it is, but it's good to kind of review what it is. And it is kind of hard to understand, and I have difficulty sometimes explaining to a client what it is as well. But in its general terms, a heat pump is, this thing keeps coming down on me. I should know this by heart, but it's a device that transfers heat, right? From a cold area to a hotter area using mechanical energy, right? That's what it is. And it uses electricity typically to do that. There's many forms of heat pumps. Your refrigerator is a heat pump. It takes heat out of the inside of the box and it rejects it out and back. An air conditioner can be considered a heat pump. It takes heat out of your house and it puts it outside. How it does that? Does it with refrigerants. With a refrigerator, does it with refrigerants and a compressor. We've got a heat pump water heater over here on the left. This is what I was working on today, not this one, but it's the one very like this. It takes heat out of the air in your house. Depending on the type, it can be outside air as well, and it puts it into the hot water, so it makes it a little cooler in the house. And then down at the bottom is just an example of geothermal or ground source heat pump. There's also water source heat pump, but we're using electricity, and we're not using the electricity as a primary fuel to create heat like a toaster. It's not going through a resistive element. We're not burning any gas. We're using electricity to move heat in some capacity, whether it's fluid transfer. But in the case of heat pumps, it's refrigerant that we're using. So let me see if I can explain this. So heat pumps aren't magic. Air conditioners have been around 100 years. So this is actually a really interesting diagram. And I'm gonna start over here on, I guess, my left, but the heating mode here. And what you'll notice is that from the compressor, the orange is warmer air, right? And if you've got your indoor air, let's say if you want it to be 70, and this fluid, this refrigerant coming through here is 100 degrees, for example, and air is flowing across that coil or that heat exchanger inside maybe your furnace. It's not furnace, inside what we would call an air handler, or what I have right here in my house, a mini split. So it's a little heat exchanger with a fan. If that air passes over that warmer coil, it will pick up that heat. It'll cool down the refrigerant, but that heat will then come into your house. Well, that cooler refrigerant then goes back. And then something that I think is pretty important to understand is this bottom part, this expansion valve. And the example that I like to use here is if any of you are cyclists and you've given up on the little pumps that always seem to fail when you're out in the field, they now have CO2 cartridges. So it's high pressure CO2, and you put it into, it's a little cartridge, and you can put it onto your tire. You can release all that air, and all this high pressure air goes into your tire and it blows it up almost instantly. Well, what happens to that little cylinder? It gets really cold. I mean, they actually make little sleeves because it can freeze to your hand. So the higher the pressure, the higher the temperature. And the lower the pressure, the lower the temperature. So when we lower pressure, it really lowers the temperature. Well, that's what happens in an expansion valve. And so this is all in a closed loop. This is not a CO2 cartridge where it's open to the environment, but that refrigerant, once it goes through that expansion valve, can greatly lower its temperature. Now, here's the magic of a heat pump and where a lot of people get hung up. If I now have really cold refrigerant, let's say the refrigerant is at -50 and it's 0 degrees outside. Well, the air outside is much warmer than the refrigerant. So the reverse is going to happen. The air that's passing across that warm or that really cold refrigerant, the air is going to become colder and the refrigerant is going to warm up. And so it's transferring its heat there. And so you end up with the refrigerant that rises in temperature. And then the part goes back to the compressor, it compresses it again. So that's where we're using energy here. That's what drives this whole thing. We're creating that high pressure liquid refrigerant again, and that's the cycle. But the difference of pressure and temperature and our ability to control that in a closed loop is really what and how a heat pump works. So I say they're not magic, but they are kind of magic in a way because again, we're not using it's not a giant toaster. We're using electricity to move heat. And if it's warm outside, and let's say it's 50 degrees outside, and we're trying to keep it 70 in our house, we might need a little bit of energy to extract that heat with that refrigerant cycle. So we might have what's called a coefficient of performance or a COP of 5. And the colder it gets, let's say it's 30 degrees. At 30 degrees, we have to extract and make up 40 degrees of temperature. Well, it's going to have to work a little bit more. So our coefficient of performance, the energy input that goes into the compressor, the amount of heat, the amount of energy that comes out will be a little bit lower. So it might be a COP of 3. If it gets down to 0, it might be a COP of 2. If it gets to -10, it might be a COP of 1.5. But the point is, we're getting multiple efficiencies. So a COP can be thought of as let's say 100% efficiency is a COP of 1. The COP of 3 is 300% efficiency. Most heat pumps on balance in air conditioning mode and heating mode will operate anywhere from 2.5 to 3 COP. That's why when you use a heat pump, it doesn't cost any more than a gas appliance to create heat, even though gas is 3 times less expensive per unit of energy and electricity is 3 times more expensive, but we have 3 times the efficiency. So we'll talk about how much it costs to operate these, but I'll just answer the question in my experience. It ends up being about a balance. Your gas bill goes down, your electric bill goes up, but they go up in a very similar fashion. So you end up being about even. But that's not necessarily the purpose of why I install heat pumps. I want to lower carbon, and they're much more efficient. So using a third of the energy. And if it's a renewably sourced electricity, then that's even better. So really quickly, I was just in Europe with my family in an RV touring around, and we saw heat pumps all over the place in cold climates in Switzerland, all over. And you can see that the rest of the world has taken on this technology, lock, stock, and barrel for the last 30 years, and we're still getting started, but good signs. This presentation I kind of adapted from one a couple years ago, but heat pumps are now outselling furnaces. That's amazing. The problem is that air conditioners are still outselling both. And because a heat pump is an air conditioner, it's a shame that we don't do both and just say, hey, heat pumps are better technology. I don't even care if they're cold climate heat pumps for everyone. And let's say that cold climate heat pumps are, for whatever reason, a little bit more expensive. If everyone just installed a heat pump instead of an air conditioner the next time their AC broke, we'd still end up shaving a huge portion that's based on fossil fuel heating right now from 70 to, let's say, 30, where a cold climate heat pump would work well below that. But let's say a regular heat pump only works down to 30. We take all of that and transfer it on to more renewable electricity. And the grid continues to get greener and greener and greener. Excel Energy is now over 50% renewably based, excuse me, because of wind and solar. And quite frankly, it's cheaper. And of course, things always change, but we'll see what happens with the repeal of some of these rebates. I've been in the industry long enough to see the rebates come and go, and we keep marching forward. And I think the switch to electricity, because it is a greener fuel, because it's a better fuel in many respects, because it's more efficient, is just inevitable. It's just a matter of time before technology makes it where it's kind of a no-brainer. But I think we're there with heat pumps. Um, there are different flavors of heat pumps. These are all installs that I've done. So the one in the middle is the outside unit. This is where the compressor lives, and there's a big aluminum coil, aluminum copper coil behind this. So air is pulled through these fans, and it will either extract colder air, makes the air colder in the winter because it's taking heat out of the air, or it will blow hot air because it's extracting heat out of the house. But then this is connected to maybe what's up here on the upper left is looks like a furnace, but it's actually called an air handler. So there's no gas element to it. There's a blower, there's a filter, there's a heat exchanger there, and it can be a one-for-one replacement from a gas furnace to an air handler. But we can also have below that is what's right behind me in my house, and that's a ceiling cassette. Or in the upper right, that's a gal's house in Boulder that I installed many years ago. That's a wall cassette, or we call it a head. Down below that is a floor cassette, which is in one of my neighbors here in Boulder, or excuse me, in Golden. And so we can also mix and match these. We can have one ceiling cassette for the whole house, or if it's, but it has to be sized right. We're going to get into that. But I can also have in my house, I have 6 wall cassettes and 1 ceiling cassette, and that's my whole house. I don't have ducts anymore because my ducts were awful. It's a 120-year-old house. But for most people in more modern homes, they've got a furnace. Pretty easy to take that furnace out size-wise, get in a really high-quality filter, and replace all of that gas with the heat pump, with electric. There are other things that we're going to look at, but I'm installing one of these floor ones in a new client's. I just signed a contract with him today over in Applewood neighborhood. He's got a wall with glass all up high, and so I can't put a wall cassette there. He wants, it's his master suite, but he has floor space, so I'm going to put in one of those floor units. So heat pumps also can be the primary source of heat, but if they cannot keep up when it gets really cold, because heat pumps, if you look at the top bullet, a cold climate heat pump only can put out, in this climate, the best ones we get, about 48,000 BTUs when it's at 0 degrees out. The best ones we can get. And they might get a little bit better, but I haven't been installing these for 10 years now and haven't really changed that much. Now, a gas furnace, I can get out 100,000 BTUs. So, and they can, some systems will operate together. Mitsubishi, for example, has a system where the heat pump will continue to work and the gas furnace can come on as well. I've installed these Bosch. This one's in the inside portion that's in Littleton, and this one, the outside portion against the compressor, the condensing unit, that's at a house here in Golden just recently. And this is a cold climate heat pump, but this is for houses where the loads are above 48,000 BTUs. So what's the load? Well, let's get into that, but let me explain this a little bit more. So what you'll notice where with all the piping is that below, that's just a gas furnace, but the gas portion may never come on until the heat pump cannot keep up, which might be never. Now we want to size it appropriately. If it's going to be never, I'd just assume not have any gas in your home at all. But if you have a 5,000 square foot home, or if your home's very leaky or old or poorly insulated, you might need more BTUs when it's really cold to keep your house comfortable. If I only have 48,000 to give and your house needs more, then the gas furnace can take over. So that's one way, but there are other sources of backup. You can do electric space heaters, you can do fireplaces, you can do wood burning stoves. So the real question here, and this is one of the things that I really want to stick with people, is what's your heat load? So you might have this house. It was one of the first houses I worked on probably 20 some years ago in Cherry Hills Village. And this house might not be in Cherry Hills Village. Maybe it's in Evergreen. Maybe it's in Nederland. Who knows where that house is? Is it the same heat load? What's a different environment? You know, we have the heating load in California is much less than it is here in Denver, which is much less than it is in Aspen or Leadville, right? And so And it's not only that, is this house well insulated? Is it poorly insulated? Is it leaky? So how the house looks doesn't really make any difference. It's how the house is built. What's the insulation values? How much air leakage is there? How big is it? So what we need to do is we need to say on a what we call the design day. Well, let me just go through these. So what goes out must come in. BTUs out must equal BTUs in for you to be comfortable, right? If your BTUs out are greater than your BTUs in that the system can provide in, you're going to be cold. And likewise in air conditioning, uh, if the BTU in of heat is too much and the system can't take it out, then you're going to be uncomfortable. So we want to size it perfectly. Now, small is better than large, question mark. We can talk about that a little bit, but I like to just say size it perfectly. So you have to have a heat load. Your contractor needs to do a heat load. And I would have them show that heat load to you. It's a very important thing to have. Now, we design for a 99% day. Why is that? And what is that? If you look at the graph of heating from a cold, like let's say 0 degrees here and 100 degrees here, the bulk of our heating load and cooling load is right in the middle, 35, 40, 50, 60 degrees. That's the majority of days. As it gets up to 100, we have exceeding days, but it gets there sometimes. Likewise, on this side down here, we have 0, -10, -20. There are a few days, maybe even a few hours, the further that we go in an average year that we're going to have that. So if we design for a -20 degree temperature, because does it reach let's say -10, does it reach -10 here? Every once in a while, we'll have a morning in February where it might reach that low. Maybe. But it's exceedingly rare. So we don't want to design the system for these really rare occasions because then we'll oversize the system. Then we're stuck with this big motor, this big compressor that's using all this energy for the bulk of the year. And we've sized it for this. It's just like a car. If you pull a boat up Eisenhower once a year going to your family reunion, and if you need to go, if you size your car to go the speed limit up Eisenhower for that one occasion, and then you're driving around the other 360 days a year without a boat, but you sized your engine to pull the boat at 70 miles an hour, you're not going to get great mileage. And that's the same idea here. So we designed for the 99% day. So 4 days a year, given the historical averages of temperature, you might need more heat than that. But that's how we design. And that way you might have 4 days a year where you need to put on a sweater. It doesn't mean your house is going to be 50 degrees, but it means you can't maintain 70 if it's sized perfectly. But what I find is that almost always these load calculations are a little bit conservative, and I've had almost zero clients when I've sized things perfectly that call me and say, "Oh, my house is too cold." Even on those cold days, I'll get a call and I'll pick up the phone. I'll be like, "Oh man, it's cold this morning." I'm gonna get the calls. I'm like, "Hey Sam, how's it going? Like, I know you're gonna say the system's not keeping you warm. Bill, did you install a backup heater here? Did you put in an electric strip heater here? Like, it's so warm. I can't believe we're so comfortable." And that's been my experience over and over and over. So trust your loads, trust your contractor's loads. Backups, I'm going to skip by because we did talk about some of those, but insulation, air leakage, windows, where it is, that all makes a difference. It's not just what your home looks like. So you can't go by rule of thumb, which is how contractors have sized in the past. I'm actually going to switch over to another website really quick because I want you all to understand that you have the power and the ability to look at all the different heat pumps yourself. And this is really going to be your source of knowledge. So it makes you an expert. NEEP is, I don't even know what it is. I think it's the New England Energy Performance Program or something, but they've compiled a list of all the different heat pumps that are on the market right now. In fact, if you look here down at the bottom, it says 217,000 heat pumps plus are here, but we're not interested in all these. A lot of these we can't even get. what we're interested in, let's just start here. Let's see what your house is like. And this is a way for you to compare a bid from contractor A and contractor B and contractor C, because you don't know what they've given you. And I've seen so many contractors bid things that are not really great cold climate heat pumps. They're okay, but they might give out 20,000 BTUs at zero when you need 40,000 BTUs at zero. And so they're relying too much on the gas backup or an electric strip backup. And then it ends up being inefficient. So what I want is, let's say central air conditioning, no. Let's go all products, all ducting configurations. It's got all these single zone, non-ducted floor, wall, ceiling, compact ducted. Single zone, centrally ducted. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to replace my gas furnace with one unit. So look now we're down to 198. Well, that's not very good. I want something that is Energy Star cold climate, because that then qualifies us for the Colorado tax credit. Now we're down to 33,000. Well, I also want something that till the end of this year applies for the federal tax credit of $2,000. So now we're down to 5,950. Interesting. Oh, my contractor said my heat load was 48,000 BTUs. So and I don't care about the heat capacity at 47, I want the heat capacity. This is at 5 degrees. So I'm going to go up to 48,000 BTUs. Let's see what we have. 109 heat pumps. So we just took over 200,000 heat pumps and we said, I need a centrally ducted system that qualifies for the rebates, that's going to meet Excel's rebate as well, and Boulder and Golden and everywhere else, that gives out this amount of heat. And in Colorado, we have to derate even more. So this is sea level derate. So this is sea level performance. Because the air is thinner here, it packs less punch. So it doesn't carry as much heat. So we're actually about 10 to 20% below that actual number. So call it 40,000 BTUs. If you know your load, you can then cite this. Well, let's look here. Tosset. I don't even know what that is. I've never even heard of it. Good luck finding it. Tosset. GREE you can get, but no one carries it around here. That's something you order online. And GREE they're not bad systems. It might be tough if it comes to a warranty. Mitsubishi. This is what system I install all the time, the PUZ HA42. This is an older one because it's with the older style refrigerant, but let's just view the details. So it tells me that well, I'm going to go over here, heating 5 degrees, 70 degrees so indoors, it'll put out 48,000 BTUs. It'll tell me the coefficient of performance at that level. It'll tell me how many kilowatts it uses. That's pretty good. Well, what about minus 13? Well, it puts out 38,000 BTUs at minus 13. It qualifies for Energy Star, qualifies for the federal tax credit. So if you get a bid from your contractor and it's got this stuff on it, let's say, well, we could just look through here and say, hey, who else is on here? And I know that my Bosch system that I install a lot is on here as well. Where are we at here? Midea, Kenmore, Tempstar. There are, frankly, there are not many manufacturers of heat pumps. There are some companies that will rebrand and rename their heat pumps, and there might be 10 brands that you know of. It's all one heat pump. It's all manufactured by the same company. Even Bosch. My Mitsubishi is a little bit different, but you pay a little bit premium there. So this guy here, this Bosch new Ultra system, so this Bova down here, says it puts out 55. I don't want it with air handler only though. I'm going to put this with a furnace this time. So let's go to one of these. I'm going to pick a big, I don't want to get into it too much, but you have the ability to go look at this stuff in general. Heating at 5, 48,000. Heating at minus 10, 33. So it drops a little bit more when it gets cold, but it also has graphs down here. So you can actually see the minimum heat like that it will put out at 47. The minimum heat that it'll put out is 20. So you want a big spread between, I'm not going to get too technical. What you really want to just look for, what we're basing a lot of our rebates on is this number, the maximum heating capacity at 5 degrees. It's at sea level, It's going to be derated a little bit, but your contractors need to design or have someone design the system so that it fits your heat load. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. Okay. So let's continue on. In cold climates, what are some considerations? Well, obviously snow. And so this is in Boulder up here on the upper left with the stucco house. Notice that it's on a stand. That's for two reasons. One, if snow builds up, you don't want it to build up into the fan because that can affect performance. But more than that, remember, a heat pump is extracting heat out of the air. That means the air gets colder. What happens when air gets colder? It can freeze. So you can get what looks like an old style freezer on the backside of that heat exchanger, and it just gets when it's really cold and it's working really hard, it'll get covered in ice. After a while, that'll block airflow and block performance. So the heat pump will go into what's called the defrost cycle. And so it'll switch refrigerant directions really quick, which is the same as going into air conditioning mode. That's all you're doing. You're just switching the direction of the refrigerant. And it takes a little bit of heat out of the house for a couple minutes. You don't notice it inside, but it heats up the coil outside and all of that ice melts. Well, that's another reason I don't like to put heat pumps on porches, on patios, because all that water will melt off and it's cold when that happens. And then you end up with a big lake of ice. So I want it over a permeable surface like stone, ground of some sort, hidden under a deck like this one on the wall over there. I did install that Fujitsu, although I installed this at the homeowner's request. I usually do not put heat pumps on buildings anymore, on roofs or walls, because although they're incredibly quiet, they do vibrate. And if you can put it on the ground, it's a better place for it because we did a passive house not far from my house here in Golden. I mean, it was really, really well insulated, perfect house. And we put the heat pump on the wall with some of these brackets. Couldn't hear it, but you could feel it. And it was like this vibration and it drove the people crazy. And I've experienced this at the Geos community in Arvada, where I had to fix a bunch of things and we tried to do vibration isolation. Just separate it from the house. Just have it on the ground if you can. Both this heat pump on the upper left and lower right have wind baffles. And that is, this one up here is up by Floyd Hill area. It was just so windy that the fans were being affected by the wind blowing by. So they have these baffles that help prevent the fans from blowing with the ambient wind because they don't like that. They're trying to keep a consistent speed. And then the thing that looks like a spaceship down on the lower left, we actually did a house in North Boulder. We did do a one on a roof because there's no other choice. It's on the third floor of a roof in North Boulder by it's Nobo. I don't know what it is. It's some apartments over there by the sports recycler. And we shrouded the whole thing because it's so windy there and hail and whatnot. So you can have these shrouds as well, but your contractor should know whether or not you need those or not. Okay, so we're going to shift gears just a little bit, and this gets a little into the weeds, and this is more opinion stuff, and maybe even lights a fire with someone, and you say you're wrong about this, and let's talk about that in a minute when we're done. So efficiency first, right? Well, my goal is not necessarily efficiency. My goal is reducing carbon into the atmosphere. So the second bullet point, you can air seal and insulate your house. You can make your home more efficient, and you should, but you can still use a significant amount of fossil fuel, which has a bigger carbon footprint if you do that. Here's a real world example. My house was built in 1904. It's brick. My house is electric only. I have no gas anymore. I have solar. I have 3 electric vehicles, 2 for work, 1 for kids and whatnot. We have tankless electric gas. I have a heat pump, capped our gas. My house isn't insulated. Why? It would cost $100,000 or more to wrap my house in foam. Now I did have decent windows when they got old and didn't work anymore. I replaced them. I'm still in that process. I'd love to insulate my house, but I made my house electric only and close to net zero with solar for far less cost than the $100,000 or more. that it would cost me to reside my home, to redo all of that. So my focus is the fourth bullet here. My advice: pick the low hanging fruit, shell and envelope stuff first. Indoor air is always important. Get an indoor air quality monitor. I've got one here, air things monitor right here. You can put it in a different room. It'll tell you on your phone what the CO2 levels are, what the VOC levels are, if you have radon, these things that you can't see. And then once you know that, you can say, holy cow, we shouldn't be cooking without a hood anymore. Every time we cook, our pollutants, PM 2.5, really spike. So that's part of the good indoor environment. Get all those. If you need insulation, you know if you need insulation if it's low, but sometimes it's hard to do, like my home. But you can still electrify everything and do the big stuff first. I mean, you can do the stove and you can do, there's lots of things to electrify, fireplaces, but the big things are your hot water heat, your vehicle, and your heating source. If you do that, whether or not you have the ability to add solar or not doesn't really make that big of a difference, because you're going to be buying electricity from Excel. They'll be happy to sell it to you, and they're going to make the money from their solar farms and their wind farms. Or you have it yourself and you may finance it so you don't pay any more than you'd buy it from Excel for. But it's all renewably sourced. So our efficiency goes up and up and up the more that we have these electric appliances. And again, these are long-term appliances. They last a long time. Heat pumps can last 30 years. Electric vehicles, they just don't, even though we have battery degradation and whatnot. I've owned electric vehicles for years and there's no maintenance. I mean, they're just better in some ways. Electric stove, I love our induction stove. It's amazing how well it works and how quickly it does things in the control. So for new homes, it's easy. Just electrify everything. You know, code is good enough, but why would you ever build to a minimum? Like, yeah, it's good enough, but you want really good windows. Homes are expensive. Heat pumps are expensive. Keep as much as you can, but if you have a limited budget, pick the low-hanging fruit, electrify everything, and then get that big stuff done first. So I know that's probably a lot of questions on this. Obviously, where your electricity comes does matter, but like I mentioned, Excel is going there because they'd be happy to make the money. And quite frankly, solar is cheaper than other forms of electricity. This is a realty office that's in the upper left corner, and he's all electric now. There's a lot of solar on that. And then this is the Geos community over here on the left, and I don't know if they're net zero, but I know that they're electric only there. I think they are. And these are the heat pumps on the roof that were giving people problems, but we did what we could. So whether or not you have solar or not, you know, it makes sense if you have a good roof for it, you should have solar on it. It makes sense financially as well. Okay, switching gears just a little bit, and then pretty close to being done. The refrigerant that we're using now is this 454B for the most part. It's right here. And when we talk about refrigerants can be bad for the environment because when they are released into the environment, they have a global warming potential that's compared with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has a global warming potential of 1. But if we look at the stuff that we used to use, R22, the second from the top. So the GWP over 100 years, so the global warming potential over 100 years is 1780. That means 1 pound of R22 equals 1,780 pounds of CO2. So it's not really good to release that stuff. And a lot of contractors, especially in the past, haven't been good enough about making sure this stuff is taken care of properly and doesn't leak, etc. But the industry fudges this a little bit, and it's frustrating to me. But of course, there are companies that are selling these products. And so we talk about GWP 100. GWP 100 is, they're trying to spread the harm out over 100 years. The harm happens in far less than that. So if we look at the real world in the red over here, the real global warming potential, which is the GWP over 20 years, we went from 1,700 to 5,300. Now a pound of seed of R22 released equals 5,300. So we just stopped using our 410A. 410A was it was a little bit, the thing with 410A is it didn't have ozone depletion, but we traded ozone depletion for higher global warming. So ozone, thankfully, it didn't end up being as big of a deal, or we helped solve it by getting rid of these fluorinated refrigerants that would cause ozone degradation. But if you look at it in the 20-year, the real global warming potential, it was 4,500. These are systems that we were installing. People are still installing 410A systems. They might have 15, 20 pounds of refrigerant in them. If you have 20 pounds leak out times 4,500, you just added 10 people to Earth. And that's why down at the bottom, I say how your contractor reclaims, manages, and installs can matter more than your heat pump for the climate, because we're often taking out an existing old air conditioner. We have to recapture all of that refrigerant. I go so far as to the hoses that we use. The EPA allows us to vent that into the air, but a hose might carry a couple ounces. Well, a couple ounces of the old refrigerant released is actually 500 to 1,000 pounds, just like that, less than a second. That's driving my car for a month. I will release it into a recovery tank. I don't know why this isn't policy, but it's not. I think people are getting more serious about it. But the refrigerant we're using now is either R22, or excuse me, R32 for the most part, or the systems I'm installing are mostly 454B. So if we look at 454B, it says, oh, it's 490. Oops, let me go back. It's a 490 in the 100 years, but it's still 1,700 in the real 20-year global warming potential. So yes, it's lower global warming potential, but it's still bad. So we don't want this stuff to be released. So ask your contractor how they reclaim, what refrigerant they use. Europe has moved to some other refrigerants. If you look down at the bottom of the list, it's a little counterintuitive, but isobutane, propane, we think of propane. Hey, isn't that a fossil fuel? It has a global warming potential that's less than carbon dioxide. And propane actually works as a refrigerant. There are lots of things that are refrigerant. Air at the very bottom is a refrigerant. It has a global warming potential of 0, but they have different properties. Remember that pressure and temperature, and when we expand, when we lower the pressure, the temperature drops, and when we squeeze it together, the temperature rises. We need that to be in the right range for us to be able to extract heat easily out of that. And so that's why we use what we use now. We will have new refrigerants in the future, but we're just dragging our feet on this stuff. And I just wish we would go to propane or some of the better systems right now. And CO2 is a refrigerant as well, and there are some issues with it. But anyway, know a little bit about refrigerants now. Okay, rebates and incentives, and then I just have a couple more slides. Xcel Energy right now has great rebates. It's $2,250 per ton at 5 degrees. So that's where you go back to that NEEP database, and this is at sea level. They're not derating for Colorado. So you look at the heat pump that your contractor recommended, you find out how much, if they're actually giving you the right rebate, and sometimes they'll say, hey, you're going to get this 48,000 BTUs at 5 degrees, like the Bosch and Mitsubishi systems I installed. That's $9,000 rebate. Well, maybe the system they installed, they say you're going to get a $9,000 rebate because it's a 4-ton unit, but maybe it says it's 4-ton, but it only puts out 24,000 BTUs at 5 degrees. Well, you're only going to get 4,500. Still good, but not great. And you don't want the biggest system that gets the best rebate. You want it sized appropriately, but that's the Xcel rebate. Colorado state tax credit is given by the contractor at the point of sale to the homeowner. It can be anywhere from, I don't know the rules, but I think it's between like $500 and $1,500. So I use $1,000 as average. Energy Star is the check for that. So that's why that NEEP website is neat as well, because you can check Energy Star and then you have qualifications for the Colorado tax credit. Federal tax credit, which unfortunately is going away at the end of this year, but it's $2,000 tax credit, contractors like the one above, but it has to be north equipment. The US has been divided into north and south. We are in the north just because it's colder. And then obviously there's local stuff. So City of Golden gives $2,000 for any cold climate centrally ducted heat pump. And then it's, I think, 800 for a mini split. Boulder gives 900, Boulder County gives 400. And then low income, it's still kind of hard to figure out. But if you go on the different websites wherever you live, look up the city, find out what is qualifying for low income, there can be some healthy rebates. But I usually find that the cost of the heat pump is about half covered with rebates. So if it's a $25,000 heat pump, you're going to get about 12,500 back in rebates. If it's a $15,000 heat pump, you're going to get about 7,500 back in rebates. Some other things to consider: difficulty of installation. These are X factors. Electrical can certainly be a factor. A lot of contractors I have seen that say, oh, you need a panel upgrade, you need a panel upgrade, you need a new panel. I rarely find that you need a new panel. We can often combine breakers. We can then add tandem breakers or quad breakers. The size of your panel, the overall main breaker size matters a little bit, but if you've got 150 amp breakers or over, you can almost electrify everything. And there's even some new things in the code that are showing that we really can electrify everything, even on smaller 100 amp panels. But if you got a 200 amp panel, go to town, electrify everything you want. And you might need a sub panel. You might need a panel upgrade, but talk to your contractor about it, and also get multiple bids on this stuff. Up in the center, this is a client in Boulder. She had almost a brand new furnace, and it was a 97% efficient furnace. So I didn't sell her a new furnace, but she wanted to electrify. So we put a heat pump on top of an existing furnace. It doesn't save as much as you think it would save, but that, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 furnace is now out of the equation. And there are reasons to replace the furnace sometimes, but there's sometimes not. Sometimes we just want to add a heat pump to an existing furnace, like we'd add an air conditioner to an existing furnace. This is the Guy Schoolhouse in downtown Golden on the upper right. It's a really small building, so size matters. So that's a heat pump we installed years and years ago. And then over here, that's a building that I managed, I don't know, 20 years ago now. It was a pop top in Martin Acres, and that house was so efficient. We actually did geothermal there, and we had solar thermal, and we had PV. It was kind of a showcase home, but the insulation, all of that matters with the sizing. So what do you ask your contractor? Well, one, you demand a heat load. I want a heat load for my house. And then check to make sure that the equipment they have spec'd meets your demand. Get multiple bids. Don't rely on a bid from GB3 Energy. Get one from Elephant Energy. Get one from Midwest. Get one from Rocky Mountain Heat Pumps. There's some good companies out there doing good work. Get multiple bids from these guys. These guys all do their heat loads. A lot of the bigger companies, the really big companies that you've seen their truck, they're owned from a consortium out of town. They're just trying to go as quickly as possible. And a lot of times they don't do sizing. I just installed a system last week in North Golden, and a company that I will not name had a truck literally across from me, and they took out a 97% efficient furnace, and they put in a brand new 97% efficient furnace, and the size was the exact same. It's 80,000 BTUs, and they put in another 80,000 BTUs. Now they put in a heat pump too, and the heat pump wasn't bad, but these are all cookie cutter homes. My load on that home was 20,000 BTUs because it's small and very well insulated. I have no need for any gas there. I put in a single cold climate heat pump, and it's going to work far better than that mediocre cold climate heat pump and the gas furnace, which is grossly oversized because it's going to move more air. The system I put in, the client is so happy because it's so quiet. So contractor experience matters. Subcontracted versus in-house. There are a number of companies now that are subcontracting to other third-party installers, if that makes a difference to you. I think there's a little more control if you do it in-house. Recycling. What do they do with the subcontracted laborer guys? Do they take the water heaters and Do they scrap them? Do they throw them in the waste? They probably scrap them. Metal's pretty easy, but what about the cardboard? What about the styrofoam? What about the plastic? Like, we recycle everything, and so that might be important to you, and so it might be important to our clients as well. We drive electric vehicles for installs. That might be important. We manage our refrigerant very well, and there are other companies that do this as well. Warranties are all about the same, um, but then the other thing here, um, air filtration and indoor air quality. It is such a great opportunity when you install a new heat pump to put in a very robust filter. By robust, I mean a media filter. What a media filter is, it's basically a 4 or 5 inch wide filter, which makes it last a lot longer. But there's also so much surface area that you can get better filtration from this filter that is 4 inches, even though it seems like it'd be really resistive to airflow. It actually has really good airflow. And because there's so much surface area, it can just pick up all these little pieces. So we typically install what's called MERV 13, which is a minimum efficiency rating value. It's a value of how much particulates it picks up. MERV 13 north to 16, that's about all you can get with residential systems until you go to HEPA. But then those are not really supported with a furnace or an air handler or a typical fan that moves air through ducts. You almost need a separate type of, I've got one here, a COWAY HEPA filter for smoke and things like that. But air filtration is really important. It's really easy to get right. And then there are other things to consider. So with that, we're back to the very first slide. What do you want to know? I'm going to leave it. This is my last slide. I'll put that up at the very end, but I'm going to leave these questions up right now. And then, Pete, if you can help me see questions or answer questions, or if people want to ask me questions, I do really appreciate your time. You have other places to be, and I hope that this was valuable for you. And yeah, let's just open it up and see if anyone has anything to ask.
Okay, well, thanks, Bill. And yeah, we've got a lot of questions in the queue, so I'll just go ahead and read through these. That way they'll be recorded for posterity. First one, how to decide between mini splits or a ducted heat pump?
Great question. Um, Mini splits, which are the smaller units on your wall, on your ceiling, on your floor. They can even be mini ducted that would serve just a couple bedrooms if you have an attic space above. They really only serve and heat and cool the area where they are. If I have a big open floor plan, I do a lot of work for, excuse me, a new contractor who builds really high quality, highly insulated homes. Excuse me, very airtight. One little mini split head, because it's all open concept, is enough BTUs. But if I've got an old home like mine, where I've got a bedroom and a kitchen and a living room and an office and another bedroom, you almost need a mini split in every single one of those rooms. You can't ask the mini split that's in the kitchen and living room area to heat the bedroom. It doesn't work that way. It'll be too cold here and too hot here, or too hot here and too cold there. There are times when people like it like that, where they say, "Hey, I like my bedrooms colder. We've got good shade." It's all part of the design thing. But mini splits can be really highly efficient. I like mini splits when it's 1, 2, or 3 zones. I have 7 in my house. This is an expensive system. So at beyond 3 heads, mini splits start to become more expensive than centrally ducted systems. And so, because we've got all of these refrigerant lines, it's a lot of labor. Each unit is a little air handler. It's like a little furnace. It's a little, it's got a blower, it's got a coil, and they start to get complicated. If I'm doing a new house, I can see that a mini split would make sense because I can run everything in the walls. I don't have to run it on the outside of an existing home. So I think it's just a conversation to have with your contractor or your contractors that you're bidding. One reason to do mini splits is if you have a house that's heated with, let's say, a baseboard or hydronic hot water boiler. Um, maybe it's too much to replace that and have 10 mini splits throughout your house, but maybe you can put one big BTU central one and just turn your thermostat on your boiler down, and your mini split can do as much as it can, but when it can't keep up anymore, the temperature will drop, the boiler thermostat will hit, the boiler will turn on. So there are ways for mini splits and times where mini splits make a lot of sense, but um, they do get expensive when you start to add a lot of heads.
Okay. Do heat pumps make sense for off-grid homes?
Whew, that's a great question. I don't know. Um, I don't know enough about batteries and the amount of amperage that you can store and put out in heat pumps. Heat pumps are an electrical device, um, and they can use a fair bit of energy. Now they all have, most of them now have kind of a soft start, so it's not gonna knock your system out because all of a sudden the compressor's on. It'll kind of ramp up slowly. But I think that's a question that you would need to work with your installer to figure out what's my max amp draw, what's my max load. You would need a pretty, yes, I think it could make sense. I know there are people up in Fraser that have an off-grid house that they had 3 mini splits installed, because three sometimes is more efficient than having one 3 zone, what we call a multi-split unit. And they said it was way overkill. They could have just gotten away with one. But they're off grid, so I know it can be done. But I just don't know enough about it. But I'm happy to look into it if you'd like to reach out to me a little bit later. But I know it can be done. I just don't know the details.
Okay. How many amps are needed for your heat pump?
So the smaller mini splits, they actually do make 120-volt, 15 amp systems, like little mini splits, small 6,000 BTU heat pumps for heating and cooling a small room. But it has to be a dedicated circuit. Most of the 1 and 2 zone mini splits, almost all mini splits that I install, and I think most of them are all 240 volts. So it's a 2-pole breaker because it's pulling off each leg, 120, 120 for 240. The smaller ones are 15 or 20. Some of the medium sized ones are 20, 30. And then the bigger ones are 40, 50 amps for the dedicated circuits. I never really see anything that's 60. So for a big whole house system, it's usually a 40 or a 50, which is what your air conditioner, if you have one's probably on anyway. And so you can just take out the existing air conditioner if you have one, put your heat pump in and plug in the same power and it works fine. But if not, we replace wires. But again, it depends on the size of the unit. But electric resistive strip heaters, people will sometimes say, well, my loads for my home are greater than what the heat pumps, but I want to be off gas. I'm done with gas and I don't want to burn wood. I don't want to plug in an electric space heater. So I'm going to put in a giant toaster. I'm going to put in an electric resistive element, which is literally a giant toaster. And that might use a 60 amp circuit that's totally separate from the 50 amp circuit that the heat pump might be on. But I caution people, don't do that if you're not okay with a $400 or $500 bill in the middle of January or February, and that you don't have good controls on. Because if that heat pump says, oh, I just can't do this anymore, and it kicks on this giant toaster, you can imagine what happens to your electric meter. It just starts spinning. And so I find it, what I've typically done, if I'm close with my heat loads, but maybe my clients, maybe they're at 55,000 BTUs and I can get them a system that can do 48, I'll say, let's just not install the strip heater right now. Let's save that money. Let's talk after this winter. If you're okay putting on a sweater when if it does get down to 65 or 60, and then let's talk. Since I've started doing that, because I did have some in the early days when I was installing, where I installed strip heaters, and people would call me like, Bill, this is $400 a month. I'm like, I'm sorry. They call and say, it's fine. It's good enough. We plugged in a space heater and it was great. We turned on our gas fireplace. It was fine. And the loads are usually pretty good. And I've never had to go back, but you can always retrofit, just like you can retrofit a humidifier, just like you can retrofit a strip heater. You can always add heat to a system later, but as long you still want to size it close. But if you're close, just see what happens first. So I got off the topic on the amps a little bit, but 60 for strip heaters if they're big, 50 for big heat pumps, all the way down to about 15.
Okay, so you kind of answered, I think, the next question, which is a backup furnace necessary? Um, but you can kind of add to that, I
Yeah,
think.
I will. I'll tell you, in my experience, I trust my heat loads now. I do all my own loads. I do all my own designs. And I think a lot of the better companies do that in-house. It's shocking how low the loads are. I install gas backup on houses that are usually 3,000 square feet or above. But if you have a house that's less than 3,000 square feet that's relatively modern, or you have a pretty modern home with decent insulation, even if it is 4,000 square feet, a lot of times your loads they're just low. They're just, you can do it with a heat pump. And some people like to have the added security of when it gets to be minus 20, which it does, they don't want to think about it. And the heat pump capacity is going to drop when it gets sub zero. Where we could design the heat pump for that and say, my design temperature now is not 0 degrees for Boulder. It's now, I want to make it minus 15, but then your heat pump's too big for the rest of the year and it's inefficient. So having a backup gas furnace, if you're okay, it's like a hybrid plug-in car. If electric only is not for you, a plug-in hybrid where the plug-in part goes 40 miles, that's going to be 90+% of your miles that you put on the car. So you're not going to add that much gas. You can use a little bit, but it's a good compromise. And having a gas backup is not a bad idea for those homes. I'm doing a home up in up in Bailey. It's much colder up there. They want the security of having that gas furnace as a backup. Fine. It's the same heat pumps. It's still a cold climate heat pump. The gas furnace may never come on, but I have to have a blower anyway. It's not even that much difference in price. An air handler, which doesn't have a gas furnace, versus a furnace, which is everything that an air handler has, except it also has gas valve and a gas heat exchanger in it. They're about the same cost. So there can be venting considerations with furnaces, but I personally don't think there's anything wrong with a gas backup. Me personally, I want to be off gas. I don't care if it costs me $400 a month in January to heat my house, which sometimes it does. This is an uninsulated house, but that's worth it to me. It's important to be electric only. It's important to get what I can from solar. Now, economically, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's important to me. Just like eating healthy or whatever, I spend money on good food or good vacation or whatever it is. So it really depends on your motivation, but I don't think there's a stigma with gas. And you really, if it's sized right, you're not using gas too much. And for some homes, I'm doing a giant, like 7,000 square foot home, I have 2 gas furnaces, both with great cold climate heat pumps, and all the way down to who knows what temperature, maybe 20 degrees, maybe 10 degrees. They're going to be off of fossil fuels completely. But below that, they've got that backup. And so it just depends on your loads. Get your heat load from your client, from your contractor. Figure out, do a little bit of research on NEAT, and go with what makes the most sense for your house.
Great. Can you talk a little bit more about the ground source heat pumps, either buried coil or drilling?
I can speak on it, but we don't do any of that. Ground source heat pumps are more efficient. Why? It's a constant temperature in the earth. You dig down past the first couple of feet, it's always 50 degrees plus or minus. And so it never gets down to ambient air temperature. Your ambient, your outside temperature that the heat pump's working in is 50. Well, your coefficient of performance at 50 might be 4.5 or 5 or 6. And so they're more efficient. Maybe let's say they're twice as efficient as an air source heat pump. If you have the land, if you have the money to install, if you have the patience to wait to get people who can actually do it, um, I think geothermal makes a lot of sense because of its efficiency. But It's much more expensive, it's much more disruptive, and air source works really well. And so as a contractor, for me, I don't have many. It's just not my. It's not my wheelhouse. We do air source, which is much more affordable for people. And when you start to look at it, one of the last homes that I built when I was building straw bales was up by the old hospital up on Belmont in Boulder. The house was so efficient. I heated it with an electric strip heater, baseboard strip. You can buy them for $50 at Home Depot. And people say, why didn't you put in geothermal? That's the most efficient. This home was so efficient that I only needed heat like 4 days a year, according to my loads. So I used a little bit of electricity, but like I saved tens of thousands of dollars. Well, that's the same with the heat pump. We just talked about that with this client that I talked about with the 7,000 square foot house. He has the money to do whatever he wants. He can put in geothermal if he wants to, but a geothermal system is going to cost 100,000 or more for that house, more. And the heat pumps, let's say, are going to cost 50. Well, what are you going to save per year at a coefficient of performance at 6 versus an average of 3? A couple $1,000s a year. Well, that's a 50-year payback. So it may make sense, it may not. There's certainly a time for geothermal. If I'm doing a brand new property, I'm digging, I might put it underneath. If I'm building apartment complexes like they do in Europe a lot, they'll have one geothermal loop for a whole block of homes, like district geothermal. That makes all the sense in the world. But it is at least 2 to 3 times more expensive in my experience. And it is twice as efficient. But when you're talking about savings, 1,000 or maybe $2,000 a year, a lot of times it just doesn't make sense.
Okay. How do you improve the performance of a heat pump for cold weather? Note our Mitsubishi heat pump quit providing heat around 0 degrees last winter.
Well, I would make sure, it depends on what model it is. Um, I would make sure that your refrigerant is still there. So you might have your installer check to make sure that it's still working properly. Um, Filters are a big thing, and cleanliness of your coils are a big thing. So the outside unit, the condensing unit, should be clean. So if there are cottonwoods, leaves, dirt that get built up on that radiator, just like with an air conditioner, they're made to be out in the rain and the snow, and you want to clean those coils. And so you can just take a hose, not high pressure, that'll bend the little delicate fins that give the surface area for heat exchange, but just run water over it. But if that doesn't work, there are products you can use as well. Contractors have special tools to do as well. But then your inside filters, whether it's a mini split, like here, where it's got a little washable filter, or the filters that are in the air handler for your ducted system, the cleaner that is, the less that system has to work to move air. And a lot of times people don't even realize they have filters to clean in their mini splits. And all of a sudden the system's not as efficient. It's not cooling or heating as well. So make sure your filters are clean. Make sure your coils are clean on the outside. If your filters are really dirty on the inside, you might want to have a contractor look at the inside coil, the evaporative coil, and then check refrigerant as well. As far as whether it's in the sun in the winter, is that going to be more efficient? A little bit, but not a ton. Versus if it's in the sun in the air conditioning season, is that a little bit less efficient? Yeah, because it's trying to expel heat, but it's in a hot side of the house. It doesn't make sense to try to say I'm going to move my whole system so that it's in the sun in the winter because I want it as efficient as possible. In my opinion, you put the heat pump where it makes the most sense. Not outside your bedroom, not on the wall, because they do make noise. Even though they're extremely quiet, they do make noise, and they will make the most noise on that really quiet January morning when it's slowly snowing and you are used to hearing nothing, but your heat pump's going to be going. And if it's right outside your office or where you like to drink coffee in the morning, it's going to drive you crazy. So put it somewhere. You can build trellises around them. They have really good tolerances. There are ways to make them quiet. And I don't mean to scare people from saying these systems are loud. Although I have installed manufacturers way back in the day that are quite popular that I will never touch again. I think their products are better, but I installed top of the line stuff. And man, I got a call on cold days because it sounded like a jet engine was taken off. Most of the new systems max out at about 56, 57 decibels. Some of them are louder though, so it's a question to ask because decibels are logarithmic and they can get really loud once you get up in 60s and whatnot. But put it where makes sense, right, left, north, east, west of your house, and in a place where a little bit of noise is not going to bother you when it's cold.
Okay, great. What's the ratio between cost of gas versus electricity that makes heat pump cheaper to operate in the heating mode?
So I think it's actually I think people who don't know or want heat pumps to be more efficient say that heat pumps save money. That's not my experience. It's kind of a wash. Some people who take out all their gas and install a heat pump are going to end up paying a little bit more on average the year round. Maybe they didn't have air conditioning before, so maybe they're now air conditioning, and that might be the factor. Maybe they're using it more or less, but I find that with most clients, it ends up being a bit of a wash. But the math is, in general, let's say the coefficient of performance for a heat pump is 3, and electricity is 3 times more expensive. But if you're using 1 unit of gas that gives you whatever, 1 unit of heat, you're using a third of a unit of electricity because of coefficient of performance to make that same unit of heat. And so it's the price difference. So a therm of gas might be $1 kilowatt hour. That's not a good comparison, but suffice it to say that electricity is about 3 times more expensive. But because of the coefficient of performance and the 3 times 300% efficiency of a heat pump, the cost ends up being about the same. Everyone's house is a little bit different. Some people will really save money, but maybe their system before was not working right. But I would not plan on saving a lot of money with the heat pump. Just plan on feeling better because you're using a third less electricity.
Okay. How high is the HSPF going to get in the future?
Ah, I don't know. I don't know. Is hopefully very high. So heating seasonal performance factor is a ratio of how much electricity goes into a system or how much heat output it puts out. In a good system, I mean, Excel energies, I've got my little cheat sheet for Excel right here. So Excel requires a heat HSPF2, heating seasonal performance factor, the newer rating of 8.1 plus. And that's a pretty good HSPF. 8, 9, 10, those are all pretty good numbers. I hope we go to 100, but I don't know. I don't know. I mean, frankly, I've been doing solar for over 20 years. Solar hasn't gotten that much better. Everyone says they're waiting for solar to get better. So it was 17% back in the day. Now it's 19, maybe 21. It's just not that. We didn't have like a, a massive, tidal shift in performance of solar. And I find the same thing with furnaces. We've been installing 95+% efficient furnaces, tankless water heaters for the last 25 years. They might be 97% efficient now, but they're not much better. Heat pumps are the same, air conditioners are the same. You can still buy, sadly, an inefficient air conditioner and an inefficient heat pump. But if you buy a good heat pump, and you're going to spend the money on something good anyway, it's expensive regardless. So might as well get one that really performs well. I don't think if you wait, I think you could be waiting a long time if you are just waiting for that unicorn of that perfect performance, or when they get to this level. It just hasn't changed that much. And even with the refrigerants aren't bad, even though the new one's better in global warming. If it's managed right, it shouldn't ever leak out anyway. And so it's not a factor in the environment. So as long as your contractor manages, installs, does leak tests, make sure it's never going to leak out, that's the most important thing. But I don't know. I don't know.
How do air source heat pumps manage potential problems with ice formation when the evaporator temperature outside evaporator is below freezing?
How does the indoor evaporator temperature manage? Ask that question again.
How do air source heat pumps manage potential problems with ice formation when the evaporator temperature or the outside evaporator is below
Okay.
freezing?
Okay.
Okay.
So that's the condensing coil. So there are thermistors, which are basically little thermometers all over this coil. And I believe I'm not an engineer with this stuff. I don't engineer these. I do install them. I'm just a just a lowly mechanical contractor. Um, when the ice builds up to a sufficient amount, there are sensors for airflow. There are sensors for temperature. And there are also in one of the hidden pieces, one of the hidden energy uses of heat pumps. And this is a well-educated group here, which has surprised me. But at the bottom of the outside condensing unit and the condensing coil, there's a little electric strip heater, and it's usually 300 watts. So it's like it like those old coil style stoves where you turn it on, they kind of glow. They don't get that hot. They don't need to. But if anything does drip down into that pan, they don't want it to freeze. So there's some logic built in. Once the systems are in a cold environment with water present, it'll turn those on and they just stay on. And so you're heating the bottom of this pan so that there's not ice buildup. If you do have enough ice buildup and the machine knows it from the temperature and the airflow, then it will initiate the defrost cycle. And the colder it gets and the more humid it is outside, the more often you'll get a defrost cycle. But I can't, when it's really cold, let's say -10, I might have 3 or 4 defrost cycles a day on my system. And I think for my clients, it's about the same. But if it's 10, 15 degrees, you might have one a day, maybe two. And it just doesn't really happen that much above that. But I will mention something a little bit interesting and different. In a lot of the low income houses we work on, they might have the only place we can put a heat pump is a porch. And it's going to create a giant ice skating rink because it's going to work in the winter. It's going to get frosted and it's going to block air, and they're going to need to melt that water, and it's going to go onto the porch. And that's a liability that we can't have. So, what I've done, I'm sure other contractors are doing this too. I put in a dual fuel system. I put in a system with a gas backup, and then I program the thermostat that when it goes below 32, the furnace kicks on. And then when it's above 32, the heat pump runs. So they're still decarbonizing because remember, the majority of the heating hours in a year are above 32 degrees. They're not below 32. Like, I don't know what the number is, but it's significant. The majority of the hours are above it. So we just turn the systems off below 32, and then we don't have to deal with the defrost cycles at all. We still are on gas, but that's better than not doing a heat pump at all.
Okay. Here's a good question. And I think we were discussing this before a little bit. I already have solar hot water panels and a hot water storage tank, hydronic heating, and a gas boiler. All of
Mm.
the solutions are air source. Do you have a water to water solution?
Yeah.
And
Do
he's
you want
in,
to talk about that a little bit, Pete? What you know about
yeah,
that?
yeah. I would recommend one of our business members is a company called BrightSense, and they represent a manufacturer called Arctic Heat Pumps, and they are air to water, so they are built for this. And it's Hans Joachim Price, and he was a former Bosch guy, I think. Bill.
I know Hans. He's really well educated. He likes his Arctic stuff, and I think they perform well. And you should talk to him if you have a system like that.
Yeah, and you can link from the crest-energy.org, or it's just brightsense.com. But yeah, he'll and we have a video of him on the YouTube channel. So um, here's a good question. How tall are the heat pump hot water heaters?
Yeah, just working with one today. They're about 6 feet. on average. So they come in different sizes, gallon wise. They come in smaller sizes, but typically you want to upsize. We do a lot of heat pump water heaters as well. We probably did 50 last year. Um, if you have a 50 gallon now, you probably want to go to a 60 or 65. If you got a 65, you probably want to go to an 80. So it depends on the size of the house, but I would size for the house, not for the number of people living there, because maybe it's just two of you in a big house, and so you only need a small one. But as soon as you sell the house and a family of five come in, and there's a 50 gallon, they're not going to be happy. So the heat pumps on heat pump water heaters are all the same on a 50 gallon, on a 66 gallon, on an 80 gallon. It's all the same heat pump. It's just the storage volume and the size of the tank. And because of that, the amount of surface area, you end up with some different efficiencies. But whether you install a 50, which again is skinny and about 6 feet tall, a 66, which is maybe 5.5 feet and fatter, like 20, I want to say 23 inches, maybe 26, or the 80s, which are 6 feet tall and that same size. They're all this, there are 120-volt models which don't have electric backup like an electric water heater. But those can make sense sometimes too. I've installed a couple of those with folks in Boulder, but heat pump water heaters make water slowly in heat pump mode. And you're not buying a heat pump water heater because you want to use more electricity, so you don't keep it in electric mode. It'll make water quicker, but it'll use 3 times the energy, right? That it's not coefficient of performance, it's called uniform efficiency factor, UEF. And so we're getting close to a UEF of 4, so 400% efficiency. But heat pump water heaters are a little bit more picky in as far as how we install, because we have to have a sufficient volume of air, because it's going to cool out the air down. So if it's in a closet or if it's in a small space, it might not be the right application. Maybe you just go electric and do a highly insulated tank. Speaking of size, I'm sorry, I'm going to go off just a minute here. When we look at your home, or when you think of your home, if you're thinking about installing a new heat pump, let's say a centrally ducted heat pump, mini splits, you can fit them wherever. But you have a certain amount of room between the floor and your ducts. That's really important. Sometimes we may not be able to fit a heat pump in that space. So that might be a reason to have a dual fuel where we have a gas furnace as well, because maybe a big, highly efficient heat pump just won't fit there. So your contractors need to know and take measurements of all those things. A lot of times it's just salespeople that come out, and they're usually good about taking all that down too. But you want the biggest heat pump you can get, as long as you're not oversizing it too much. But it's got to fit, and you can't assume that you can fit a 50,000 BTU cold climate output heat pump in a mechanical room every time. A lot of times it just won't fit. So we have to move filters, or we have to change orientation, or we have to downsize a little bit. So anyway, I got off on heat pump water heaters. They're about 6 feet tall.
So here, yeah, I think this is a follow-up question from the same person
Yeah.
asking, and this is about the heat pump hot water heaters. How durable are they, lifespan,
Yeah.
and are repairs more costly than other options, I would.
Yeah. Some of the early heat pump water heaters we had problems with. I used to install Ream, and I had some fans that I replaced, but I think they've since fixed that. But I switched over to A.O. Smith. Again, a lot of these manufacturers are kind of the same, like furnaces. It might say Carrier, or Bryant, or Amana, or Bosch, or whatever, but it's all the same pieces and parts from Emerson or whomever. So I think heat pump water heaters are pretty standard, as long as it's something that will qualify for the rebates. Um, they're going to live as long as a regular tank water heater, which I give a range of 10 to 20 years. So the average being 15 years. Most of them are warranted for 12. But what's a warranty mean? Like, you're still going to have, I won't get into warranty, but let's say it's warranted for 12 years. I think most of them will last that long, but I do think we don't drain our water heaters enough. Um, they end up, I don't know if it's a chemical reaction or just heating water over and over, maybe a combination, but whether it's a gas water heater, a heat pump water heater, I've seen this a lot recently in heat pump water heaters. They kind of get a sludgy, jello-y substance in them. They still work fine, but you should flush that out. And so opening up the drain valve at the bottom just for a couple seconds every year, I think you can actually get many more years out of your water heater. Now, are people going to do that? No, most don't. Are people going to pay for a contractor like me to come out there and do it and charge them a few $100s? No, it's probably not worth it. So they just last until they die, and then you put in a new one. Um, but I think the new heat pump water heaters, I've had very few problems, but not problem free. I had a heat pump on, you guys might know Todd Collins. He's with A&E Building Solutions. He does really high-end Alpine windows in the Golden area, I think kind of all over Colorado. And I installed a heat pump heater for him, and the heat pump failed. I have replaced another one that another company installed that also a compressor failed, but that's two of hundreds that I've been involved with. And so it's just not that common anymore. But you want to make sure they're sized appropriately and that they're installed appropriately. And you do not want to bring air in from the outside to feed it. You do not want to vent it to the outside um, to save the cooling or from cooling your house down. You want to use the ambient air. You want your shell and envelope to be integral and tight, and you want it to use the ambient air both for, now you can vent it within the house, but you don't want to go across the thermal boundary. You don't want to vent it out because that can end up, or vent it in because that can end up being problematic and inefficient for other reasons I won't go into.
Okay, well, back to air source heat pumps. A really good question here. How difficult, expensive is it to retrofit these to a home that has traditional AC furnace system?
It's not difficult. It's not difficult at all. It's just like replacing your AC in your furnace. It's not a big deal. Um, there are great rebates right now. I mean, if your system is dying or dead or old, it's a no-brainer. Heat pumps are just better technology. It's the latest technology. You still do a load. You still see if you need a backup with gas. And if you do gas backup or some other sort of backup. But it's really not that big of a deal. Different heat pumps might have to replace the refrigerant lines from an AC, but sometimes we can reuse them. Sometimes we have to reuse them. But it's as simple as replacing a furnace is putting in a heat pump. That's just not that big of a deal.
Okay. Here's a good one. With mini splits, how do you heat bathrooms and other small rooms?
Great question. So with the new builders that I work with, we will, because the house is so well insulated because it's built to modern code, has really good windows. And even in my house, I said that I have 7 of these units. I don't have one in my kitchen and I don't have one in my bathroom. So how do I heat my bathroom? I don't. I have a fan that runs in my bathroom, so a little heat's being pulled in. Um, but it really is not that big of a deal. If it is when it's really cold, I have a couple space heaters in a closet that I will break out. It's usually below 5 degrees, but again, I'm in an uninsulated brick house that'll bring those out. But for my new builders where people are spending a lot of money on a home for a smaller bathroom and office, an electric space heater, it can be, again, it can be a plug-in one, or it can be one that's integrated into a fan. Panasonic makes a fan called the Whisper Warm. You need a good quiet fan in your bathroom anyway. You just add a switch on a timer. So before you go in to your shower, or you can do radiant floor, you can do electric floor, but you're not using a lot of electricity with that thing on, and you get that warm feeling in your bathroom, which you wouldn't have unless you had a warm shower or the heat pump in there. But a bathroom's just too small for a heat pump. So a little heater, it can be integrated. A towel warmer can be sufficient, depending on how efficient the build is. So there are great ways to add a little bit of heat, but we don't have heat in both our bathrooms or our kitchen, and it's fine. It's totally fine.
Okay. Here's a good one. What's the outdoor air temperature where the cost of heating via electric heat pump becomes higher than the cost of heating with a high efficiency gas furnace?
Great question. This hopefully this satisfies, but it depends. It depends on the efficiency of the unit. Depends on the cost of gas and the cost of electricity. But I think the temperature I would use about 25. Below 25 degrees, it is cheaper to make heat with a gas furnace and a cold climate heat pump. And above 25, it's less expensive with a heat pump. So if you're really looking just if using a little bit of gas uh, is not a problem for you and you don't mind using a little bit, but you want to decrease your utility bills the most, you want to pay the least, then you have a system that is programmed in to the thermostat. Here is my switchover temperature. So it will literally switch from heat pump to gas furnace at whatever temperature you set. I show my clients how to play with that. A lot of them have energy monitors, so they get to actually see where they are. And I think a lot of them end up turning the temperature down. They said, oh, I was more interested in saving money, but maybe I set it at 30 degrees and I find out they set it back to 0 or 10. But I think 25 is kind of a break even number for most modern systems. It's
Okay.
not the break even, it's the switch over.
Yep. What is the ideal way of sizing the load? I know that there's controversy around manual J calculations being an outdated approach that favors
Yeah,
oversizing systems. Is there a better way of doing it?
no, no, and yes. um, I do think there is value in doing a heat load that uses existing utility data. So it's a usage informed heat load. A traditional manual J, which is what the industry calls a heat load, is just a computer model of your home. What's the R value? You value your windows. What's the R value? What's your air leakage number? How big is it? What's your orientation? And it spits out BTUs. And you can define the indoor temperature and outdoor temperature. If you have utility bills, you can plug those in. And I think it's better, but it doesn't make that much of a difference. Um, but it is better. Although it's not recognized, a lot of time I don't use I use a manual J program. Um, for example, if you get an energy audit through Excel Energy, that'll produce a BTU load, and it's all garbage in, garbage out with anything that's computer. It depends on how detailed the person who performs the heat load is. Put the details of what they put in is what comes out. Um, but the but the utilities can modify that, and I actually use the software more often than I use manual J, like an Optima, a RightSoft or an Elite, which I have both those softwares, but I don't use them anymore. I use one that Snug Pro, or the energy auditing software, uses, and it's called Optimizer. Now, I'm actually meeting with the gentleman who owns that company on Friday, and we're talking about trying to get those to just kind of automatically. Um, people can kind of put in their addresses and their information from their bills, and it'll kind of automatically spit out one. And they're pretty good. They're pretty close. Everyone wants to get down to just detail, and get it perfect. But I find that just doing a manual J, whether it's a traditional, even one on a cell phone, they've got like Right J Mobile and all these different Conduit's a new program where you can literally take scans of your home with the LiDAR on some of the new phones and then say, this is what the wall is, and this is what the windows are. They're all pretty close. But get a couple, go to a couple different folks, and you might even have an engineering firm that'll do one that's separately. I find engineers are typically, they oversize. They're a little bit engineering. They tend to be a little conservative, which is okay. But I don't think we need to be. I think most of the heat load softwares out there right now, whether it is Optimizer, Snug, AccuRite, whatever these different programs are, I think they're all, if you put in the same data, you're going to get, plus or minus 10%. And that's for all practical purposes, that's going to be the same system anyway. If we design it, the same designer is going to take a 45,000 BTU load and a 55,000 BTU load, and it's going to be very similar equipment regardless.
Okay, unintentional follow-up on that one, but what's a good entry-level heat calc software of the ones you mentioned?
Well, I mean, you can't really use the ones that I use. I don't know. Because I'm using kind of a niche product because I know the people and that have been doing this. I know the guy who started Snug. We went through a program, the lead certification program, like 25 years ago together. I don't know, and I think Excel might have some insight into that. Excel Energy, because a lot of the contractors might use AccuLoad. There's some different ones out there, but I know I used J Mobile for a while, where you can use an iPad or phone and just kind of define your boundaries, tell it where it is, put in your windows, and that works fine. And it's relatively simple. It's much simpler than the Soft, which is one of the bigger ones, but that's a heavy program, and it's very powerful. You can do ducts and all sorts of different um, loop calculations for hydronic and everything. But most of the times we don't need that when we're sizing a heat pump. We need to know the gross load, the not the room by room load, the block load for the whole house at 0 degrees. How many BTUs leaves this house if we're going to keep it at 70? And it's going to give us a BTU per hour number. And then our manual S, which is sizing the equipment, that's where that NEAP thing helps. NEAP's not good enough for me. That's a good baseline, but I use a more sophisticated software. Mitsubishi has some things where it actually gives me the exact BTUs of my system in exact circumstances. And again, the D rate for heat pump performance is anywhere, I'd say average, probably 15% from whatever NEAP or AHRI numbers are. So if it says 50,000 BTUs, it's going to be 42.5 on average, sometimes 40, maybe 45. But you always have to derate whatever you see for elevation at minimum. But the better, that's one of the reasons I like Mitsubishi, although it tends to be more of I think they're the biggest. I also think they're the most reliable and best in my experience. But their software is great to give me exact BTU outputs. But J Mobile's pretty inexpensive and it's pretty easy. I think it's only a couple $100 a year for that. But I do a Google search for load calcs, and even Conduit, some of the newer ones, I don't think they're that expensive.
Okay. I had a assessment done about 2 weeks ago, and it was a Snug Pro, according to the
Yeah,
assessment.
Snug
Anyway,
uses Optimizer, and it's good if they put the information in.
okay.
But you could get
Um,
another one. I mean, I always do my own, even if I have someone that did a Snug audit and it tells me what the BTU loads is. I'm going to do it anyway because I want to put in the numbers. It doesn't take that long. But Snug is it's a good ballpark because they have air leakage numbers there too. Air leakage can make a big difference, but even Snug Pro, that audit software that Excel Energy uses, does a really good job at estimating air leakage as well. And as long as we get pretty close, even that, the difference between a CFM 50 air leakage number of 1100 versus 900 CFM doesn't make that many BTUs of difference. And so I don't need to know the exact blower door number. I want to be close. I don't want to be twice as leaky as I am or twice as tight as it is. I want to be close, but I don't have to have exact numbers to design the proper system.
okay. How do you calculate the BTU requirements for the design day?
That's the manual J.
Okay.
That's what we put in. And so the design day, we can talk with the clients. I have some clients, again, these low income, some of the low income folks, they're older. Some of them tend to be older. They're not happy at 70 degrees inside. They want it 80. Some of them might have health issues. So my heat pumps are going to be I will size them for an 80-degree indoor air temperatures. That's just something you can change. You can change it on the Snug audit intake. You can change your design temperatures. ACA, the Air Conditioner Contractors of America, has a list of every city in every state in North America. As far as I know, Canada probably has their own system, but in the US, and it'll say Alamosa, Colorado, 99% design day, 95% design day. So you can design for however many days you want to be beyond, but it'll say your design temperature in Alamosa is, I don't know what it is, -3. In Leadville, it's -13. In Boulder, it's 2. In Denver, it's 0. And even your building departments might say, you will use a design temperature of 1 degree and 96 for cooling. The one thing that I'll mention about cooling is almost always 99 out of 100 times a much smaller load than heating. And so if you're sizing your heat pump for heating, you're going to have more than enough cooling, right? Because when we're heating our house to 70, and we want it, let's say our design temperature is 0, that's a delta T is 70. So that heat pump has to make 70 degrees worth of heat from 0-degree air. But in cooling mode, let's say we want it 70, that would be cold, but let's say for sake of ease, we want it 70, and it's a really hot day, it's 100, 105. That's only a 30-degree delta T. So it's half of what the heat pump can actually do if it's designed to keep you hot at 70 degrees. So the air conditioning is almost always oversized. A house of glass facing east and west, no overhangs, might be different, but your air conditioner is always enough. And because these are variable speed units, they still work very well and very efficiently. So I got a little tangent there, but that's how we come up with our loads, is that software. We define the parameters: location, indoor temperature, outdoor temperature, humidity. All of those factors go into coming up with that load.
Okay. Are the rebates just for replacement only, or do they apply to new homes?
They apply to new homes as well. Although a lot of builders, I don't think, want to bother with them. You have to have an Excel account number in order to get them. As far as I know, I don't do new homes enough. And most of my builders that do new homes don't even get the rebates. They just don't bother with it. But as long as you have an Excel number, I believe you can get them. And it should also be noted that if you're installing 2 or 3 heat pumps, you get the Excel rebate for each one of them. You get the federal tax credit just once, and it's only for a heat pump. Like, you can't do a heat pump water heater and a heat pump in the same year and take $2,000 and $2,000. That's all going away in 5-6 months anyway. But Excel, if I install 2 heat pumps that both have $9,000 rebates, they get $18,000.
Okay. Will the HERE program actually be implemented now that now with the BBB bill?
I don't know. I wouldn't count on it. I think that's all going away. I know that there's still, Dr. Cog, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, Xcel Energy. There's still the majority of the rebates and the low income programs are state run, and they're still there. But as far as the federal stuff, and I don't know HERE and HERO as much, because I'm just waiting for them to figure it out. And now it seems like they're just getting it figured out, and now the rug's been pulled out. I just don't know yet. And then a lot of the low income stuff I work with, they're government agencies anyway, and so they're not even eligible for those types of programs. They get their funding from DOE or Xcel Energy or donors, and so I just don't know.
Okay. Next one, domestic hot water heat pump systems with the compressor on top. And I'm going to shorten, Jim, I'm going to shorten your question. So basically, it's making indoor air cool. Is there
Yeah,
a split hot water system where
yeah,
the compressor is outside?
yeah. They do make so. First of all, the cooling, I've calculated it before, but I think it's about 2,000 BTUs. So it's a 2,000 BTU cooling device when it's on, right? So when the hot water heater, the heat pump water heater is actually, the heat pump's on, It's taking air, 70-degree air, making it 65-degree air, and then colder and colder the longer it runs, depending on the space, hopefully not too much colder because it'll lose efficiency. It's about equivalent to 2000 BTUs. But again, most homes are 20, 30, 40, 50,000 BTUs. So it's a few percent of cooling. And you want that cooling in the summer. It's free cooling, right? You're cooling down your house to heat your water, bonus. But in the winter, it's not. You don't want to. So then you do have to use your heat pump or whatever it is to make up that heat. Is it borrowing from Peter to pay Paul? A little bit, but homes have mass. Homes are built in the ground. It's constant 50 degrees in many of these places. My dog is going crazy. Finnick, you left. I've been in here too long in my office. So they do make split heat pumps, but they're really expensive. So one of the companies that, and I would love to when they start coming out and they're more available, great. One of the problems is Sandin is one of the companies that makes these. Some of the early Sandins, one of my partners that I work with quite a bit installed some, and they had leaks and they had freezing problems. And so they have kits, but you have water going outside in the winter to be heated by the heat pump. And maybe that's a bad idea, and maybe they're not doing that anymore. But Sandin is one of them. But again, it's twice the cost, if not more. I've seen them in Europe, and Pete, you and I were talking about these. I don't know if it's called a monoblock system, but like the Arctic Air, Takeo, even Mitsubishi, and some of the bigger manufacturers, they already have these in Europe. Panasonic has them in Europe. Toshiba has them in Europe, where it heats your water, your domestic hot water, your house water for domestic space heating, and also potable water for shower and whatnot. And it does your heating and cooling loads. Europe's a little bit different in most cases because it doesn't quite get as cold. It's a little bit more mild in general. But those systems aren't popular here yet. Yes, Arctic Air and Hans Priest has Reps one, but I'm waiting for a big manufacturer, Toshiba, Mitsubishi, Panasonic, Carrier, whomever, to have one of those before I'm going to start playing with them, because I just feel like it's a little bit too bleeding edge for me and my clients at this point. And most heat pump water heaters that are one unit, we can make them work for most folks. So split systems are out there. I don't know them that well.
Okay, great. How do you deal with power outages?
The system won't run. Neither will a furnace, neither will a fireplace with an electronic starter. Um, I don't I don't have issues with power going out here. I think it's more of a fear that people have than a reality. You might be in a place where power does go out, in which case you probably need a battery backup system, and one sized appropriately to run the loads, the critical loads that you would have and that you would need. But if the power goes out, you all bundle up and hang out and read books for a while by candlelight. And then the system comes back on and it automatically restarts. But people think that, a wood burning fireplace is that's a great, device to have. I took mine out, even though I do like burning wood. It just didn't make sense in this house. Um, but a gas fireplace doesn't work unless you've specifically made it and set it up to work on a battery starter or with a battery backup for the fan. But gas fireplaces use electricity to open the gas valve to start the flame, and they don't work either. So there is no backup for the vast majority of people. When the power goes out, that's it. You got nothing. So you hope your home is well enough insulated to get through until the power starts up again. But the heat pump will not run. And neither will your gas furnace, right? Even though the gas is there, it will not run. It uses a fan that uses electricity. If you have no electricity, the furnace won't start.
Okay, great. So Pam, it looked like we got your question answered. We got just a couple more.
Yeah.
Would you recommend keeping
Okay, my
a
dog's.
3-year-old AC unit,
I'm here.
a 3-year-old AC unit and adding a heat pump next to it? The furnace is almost 29 years old. If I add a heat pump, it would be better to replace the furnace and add a strip heater for supplemental heat rather than keep the furnace for supplemental heat if you think it's too close to the end of the life, or should keep the furnace and replace it when the strip heater when it dies.
Like, call me or send me an email with that one.
Yeah,
So anyway,
that's and there's some
quick,
additional follow-ups on that. So Roger,
yeah.
yeah, just
Here's
email.
if I have it's if I have a new air conditioner on a 30-year-old furnace, bummer. A 30-year-old furnace is getting up there. It's getting pretty long in the tooth. Can it still last? Sure. Is it safe? Probably, but less so. Is it efficient? Probably 70% efficient, maybe 80% efficient, but not 95. But that may only be a couple $100 a year difference. But I think, unfortunately, with the new AC, and that's why we shouldn't sell ACs anymore. We should just sell heat pumps because it's both. It's just a little reversing valve. That's really all that it takes to make an air conditioner a heat pump. It's not expensive technology. I do think we'll actually go there, maybe after the Trump administration's gone, but I do think we'll go there at some point. But for me, I'd replace the whole thing. I'd get rid of the air conditioner, unfortunately. And if you want a heat pump, you got a furnace that's that old. You take the furnace out, you take the air conditioner out, and you put in a right-sized heat pump.
Okay, but they will email you because there are some
Yeah,
questions on domestic hot water as well. And last question,
here, say hi.
and this is a follow-up. Did you say you can zone off one ducted unit? Can that be done in older homes for the lack of zoning on their furnace?
Yeah. So really, this is one of the nice things. Not all heat pump manufacturers can do this, but for example, Don is a gentleman here in Golden, and he had a furnace that we replaced with a heat pump, but on the same outside condensing unit, we can put multiple. I can put 12 heads or cassettes on a single Mitsubishi unit. Different manufacturers have different configurations. Not all of them are like that. But he and his wife lived mostly upstairs. It was cool in the basement in the summer. And so we put in this central ducted system, which runs off of the condensing unit for heat. But then we also put an air conditioner that's a separate ceiling unit off the same unit in the upstairs. So the downstairs ducted whole house heating system doesn't ever come on for air conditioning or the air conditioning system. It doesn't use the ducts at all. It is zoned to that one space. And you can do that multiple times. So if there's a particular problem area, I do think heat pumps can solve some comfort issues in particular rooms, but it's limited. Why is the comfort issue there in the first place? Is it lack of insulation? Can you insulate more? Is it like what? Why is it uncomfortable? And if you can't solve the problem, you can add a mini split to that room. Sometimes it might make sense to add it. A totally separate system might be about the same cost as getting a multi split. And the more multi you have, remember I have 7, and let's say I'm only running one zone, and on my 7 unit, it's not very efficient because I got a big motor and I'm only running one unit. So there are some design considerations, but we can take care of comfort issues in specific rooms with the addition of multi-split heat pumps, where we can add different heat pumps to different systems. Remember those flavors: ducted, ductless of different types, mini ducted. I've got some homes where there might be a couple mini splits in specific rooms, and then one zone might be a mini ducted area where it's in an attic, and I've got a return air and 2 supplies and two bedrooms and a bathroom or something like that. So again, they get the more complex, the more heads, the more units, the more expensive they get, but we can solve those problems.
Okay, sounds great. Well, that is the end of the questions. Want to thank everyone for joining us.
Hanging in
Just
there.
under 2 hours. This is a classic CRES webinar. So, but no, great questions. And Bill, fantastic presentation. And
Thank
thank
you.
you for sharing so much knowledge with everyone. And for folks that are still on, we still have about half the folks. I'll make sure that the recording link is in the follow-up email that should go out tomorrow. And then, of course, we'll get it out on our YouTube as well. So thanks again for joining. And Bill, thanks again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Good night, everyone.